I'm Lucy. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope you enjoy the video. I had never been to this new town I was living in now, so therefore I wasn't aware or familiar with this new community where I had just rented my first ever low-income apartment, where it housed families and adults, and some of the requirements to live there were you had to be either disabled or handicapped. It was some sort of new government program to help house the homeless, and it was my understanding that the homeless that were helped there could only live there if they attended regular weekly substance abuse programs. Because the majority of the residents there had just been released from jails or prisons, and rather than have them living on the streets, the government would help keep them there if they had a sponsor. Once I started living there, I would come to find out that most of these residents, for whatever reasons, fell through the cracks and did not have sponsors monitoring them, nor did they attend any programs. So they were basically left on their own with no supervision, where they continued to live their criminal lifestyle, where they were protected by the government for fair housing. They all seemed to know each other, where they gathered in groups either outside in the building parking lot, or they would go hang out at each other's apartments day and night. It seemed like they never slept and were always up to no good, either vandalizing or loitering, where there was no noise ordinance, and their loud music, screaming, and fighting would be constant, and the sirens of rescue were daily for their overdosing. I had just signed a 1-year's lease there after losing my home and not having anywhere else to live. Out of desperation, I had rented there without being warned by the management office of what dangerous elements were to be my new neighbors. Of my first day of moving in, I was welcomed by broken glass in front of my door. That I would later come to find out that the previous renter in my apartment had committed suicide there. And all that broken glass was his doing from his mental state of mind. I couldn't back out now and leave, even though I was so tempted to run as far away from that place as possible. I knew I had to endure it there somehow, because I needed to establish a good rental history for future reference, now that my ex-roommate had ruined my excellent credit when she had stopped making the mortgage payments and allowed our house to go into foreclosure. My family and so-called friends had proven to me that I was on my own, so I needed to tough it out. I figured I would live there for about a year, and then as soon as my lease was up, I would move out. I didn't know where at the time, but I figured any place else would be better than this. So I moved into my new apartment with minimal personal belongings and my little dog, who was my only comfort and therapy. Unfortunately, he was not big enough to be my protector, so I now had to become his. My first night in my apartment, I couldn't sleep, even though I was exhausted after everything I had been through, because my next door neighbor, whose wall was right up against my wall, spent the night partying with his buddies and would pound on my adjoining wall, calling me over to go over to his place. This went on practically every night for the duration of my stay there. I would now try to learn to sleep during the day because I was too afraid to sleep at night. So I can keep an eye on my back door, which I now had put a chair under the doorknob because, according to the management office there, I was not allowed to add any additional hardware to the door. And the only thing it had was a simple door lock, which could be very easily opened, as I came to find out one day when the maintenance man showed up in my apartment, uninvited, and he was drunk. I didn't have the street smarts or malice to know how to defend myself. So I had now become super hyper vigilant, because even to walk my dog down the middle of the parking lot, where I thought it would be the safest, I would be followed and have sexually explicit remarks made by certain male residents. And especially from my next door neighbor, who I would later come to find out had just been released from prison for raping a woman. So whenever I walked out my front door, only out of necessity, I would quickly get into my car, knowing that my neighbor was watching me and now have become obsessed with me. Out of fear for my safety, I had stopped walking my dog, and whenever I would have to go outside, I would keep to myself and try not to make eye contact with anyone, and I would ignore them calling me or trying to get my attention. I lived in fear every day of my life there, with no help from the management office. And then a few months after living there, when I never imagined that things could get worse, my disability income had stopped, to which when I inquired with Social Security, they informed me that my case was now being reviewed again, and I would need to go through all the medical steps all over again until they made a decision. But meanwhile, I would not be getting any income, food stamps, nor health insurance. So while I had to jump through all the required hoops again to establish my disability again, I had no income to pay my rent, no food stamps to buy food, nor be able to afford to go to my doctors. So for a few months, I would be getting threatening letters from the management's office of pending evictions for non-payment, even though I had shown them the proof of my letters from Social Security. They just didn't care. And since I didn't have any food stamps with which to buy food, I would now be forced to get something to eat at different churches for homeless people, where I would have to stand in line outside on the hot asphalt parking lot along with real homeless people who were most of the people that were standing next to me, and they were either high or drug addicts or alcoholics or both, and who hadn't bathed in who knows how long. And under the hot Florida summer sun, the stench was unbearable, where some of them even had body lice. And I would just stand there and pray as I would ask God to please keep me safe, and I felt that I would faint at any moment. I then became very creative and started making homemade candles and soaps, which thankfully my little business helped me get through those months of disability with no income. Thankfully, eventually my disability was reinstated again, and I was able to catch up on my rent and now had food stamps again to buy some food and to go to the doctors with my health insurance again. By now, I had somehow, by the grace of God, managed to survive my almost 1-year ordeal of living in the pits. I had thankfully started going to different churches and started meeting and making some nice new friends that helped me get through the ending part of living in my hellhole. And as my 1-year lease was coming up, I had managed to somehow save up $500 from my little candle and soap making business, and found a little old dilapidated trailer in a trailer park and in another town that I was more than happy to rent. But before I left that disgusting place behind, my oldest sister, who I hadn't seen in 10 years because she had stopped talking to me and to the rest of our family for 10 years, when she had met and married her husband and they became some sort of religious missionaries. All of a sudden, one day, out of the clear blue, reappeared back in my life again. After all this time, showed up at my apartment looking for me so that I could comfort her, because her husband had just died and she was now raising their teenage son on her own, and she now needed the love and support of her family. I hadn't seen my nephew since he was a baby, and when my sister saw me, her first reaction was to hug me, and she started crying on my shoulder as I held her and tried to comfort her. When she saw where I was living, her first question to me was, how could I live there? I would then come to find out that my sister was now very well off financially. With her job as a high-ranking officer in a worldwide church organization, which I'm not going to even name, and from the money she received from her husband's life insurance policy. And so my journey
Thanks for stopping
continues.
by. I hope you enjoyed the video.
Please stay
and
tuned for
come
my
back to
next
see the
chapter
one.
to find out what
Be
happens
blessed.
next.
Bye.